If- Okay,
Welcome to welcome to the Alaska TTAP webinar series. Today's webinar on financial internal controls, single audit is going to be presented by Doug Roberts of FHWA. Doug, take it away.
great. Thank you, Vicki. I'd like to welcome everybody to the training session today. And for those of you that I may have not talked to in the past, my name is Doug Roberts. And as Vicki mentioned, I am with the Office of Tribal Transportation with the FHWA, and I'm honored to have the chance to speak with you all today. Today, we're going to be diving into single audits. And what we did is we went back and looked at all of the data for Alaska TTP programs so we could present to you some of the best practices and some of the findings that have been coming up over the past 5 years for all single audits for TTP programs within your region. And this isn't just about numbers. The focus of what we're going to be talking about is best practices. You know, what works and what hasn't worked for our TTP partners. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering. The first step is looking at the landscape. Is we'll start by what the single audit process is and what it isn't, recognizing how proactive strategies can help us avoid findings in the first place and get clean audits. And candidly, what I've noticed over the years is that it's just not that hard if you'll do a little bit of work on the front end, and then we can avoid all those future findings from your audits. The next thing that we'll be doing is we'll be looking at the actual single audit process. We're to break down the single audit process in such a way that hopefully it's going to make sense. And I really want to highlight why this process actually matters. So we want to think of the single audit process as a helpful guide, something that isn't punitive, but that it can help your offices track and managing your funding in the best way possible. And finally, we'll talk about how to prep for your single audit. And really, that prep is the key to making this thing work for each of your offices. So do me a favor, later on, I'll be asking you about all of the audits that you may have been through and kind of what worked best for you, and maybe some things that didn't work as well as you wanted them to. And so please be thinking of those as we go through this training, because that is something that I'm going to be asking about towards the end of the session. So let's get started. Let's get to the first slide. And um, talking a little bit about single audits, what they are, how they affect us, and why do they matter. They're really for the Office of Tribal Transportation. It's one of the most important transparent measures that we have to measure the compliance for our transportation program. So thinking about it, there's tons of factors that play into what's working and what's not working. And so thinking about all of our travel partners across the nation, we've got about 25 to 28 people on our staff at at FHWA. So we really depend on single audit process as a primary measure in how well all of our partners are doing. So, you know, we also have things that we do like workshops, in-person visits, virtual training, TTAP training, and some other things that also help us. Now, I would ask you to look at the numbers on the slide. 2 CFR 200 is the primary guidance that leads us whenever it comes to the single audit. So whenever we're talking about tribes that have programs over $1 million, that $1 million is the aggregate amount of funding total funding for your tribal government. So that means the sum of all the funding you get from all of the U.S. government programs. So add those all up, and if it's over 1 million, you're subject to a single audit. And so if in the future you ever really wanted to get into the weeds on this stuff, I would tell you to reference 2 CFR 200, and there's several different sections that we're going to cover, but those sections really get it into the weeds on details of what all those different things look like. So let me highlight this right off the bat, and you'll notice that last note on that slide. Late audit submissions are the single most common audit findings for all of our TTP partners in your region. So long story short is a lot of times people aren't turning in their single audits, period. They're getting their single audits done late, or they're turning them in late. And so this is the number one finding across all the findings within the whole region. And so we'll be talking more about this later on, but put that on your radar as something that you want to keep in mind. So a question for you, and maybe you could punch it into the chat and Vicky could check it for me, but what happens if your tribal government gets less than $1 million in total funding? Can anybody put that into the chat for me? And I think I can view the chat.
Okay, I will make sure you should be able to view
I
the
think so, yeah.
Q&A, and
So
somebody,
cool.
Daniel Burke from Caltrans, actually put in as a note, the 1 million threshold is only for fiscal years that end after the 1st of October 2024.
Right. And so if you get less than $1 million in total federal funds, you aren't subject to having to do a single audit. For those offices, I still recommend that they do some sort of internal financial process audit to make sure that everything is running smoothly. Because whenever you think about it, it just makes sense that if you had your own business, that you would want to make sure that everything is running smoothly. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And so the next idea is, why do single audits even matter? So we get a lot of feedback from tribal partners across the nation and in your region that tell us, well, the single audits really aren't in my area, or the task of audits is really done by my finance folks. So even if you're working outside of finance in engineering or operations, findings and failure to correct those findings year over year can and will probably cause your transportation program problems. So that's why we're working hard to get out the word, to give everyone proactive technical guidance so they can ultimately correct any of the root causes before these things turned into findings. And so some of the key points when it comes to single audits, that they help ensure federal funding is used for the right purposes. It helps build transparency by documenting how funds are spent. And this not only satisfies the regs, but it also fosters confidence in your particular communities that your office is managing federal funds the way that they should be. And on a really positive side of this thing is that something that makes audits valuable is they can highlight your strengths and help you pinpoint areas that you could make better with just a little bit of effort. So this feedback loop is what we call it. If you can get this feedback loop, it's a really great way to ramp up the quality of all of your data. And so it also helps you to build partnerships, those partnerships with your offices, internal offices, your finance office, your transportation offices, and other offices that might have a hand in that audit process. And let's go to the next slide. And so something that we're always asked is, so what do auditors really do anyway whenever they come in to do a single audit? So the auditors play a crucial role in making sure that tribal partners navigate the ins and outs of federal funding. So as you all know, they get federal funding. There's a lot of ins and outs with the regs, the guidelines from agency to agency. So if you can closely follow those guidelines found in 2 CFR 200, they really help safeguard your program as far as managing your funds properly and how well your TTP program can do and how that measurement looks to FHWA. So the auditors are responsible for assessing the risk of noncompliance in your program. So there's a lot of talk now about managing risk. And so earlier I mentioned it's a proactive state of mind that if we can manage that risk on the front end, then on the back end, before you ever even get to your single audit, you've gotten all of those risks managed properly. So auditors also look in depth at things like financial statements, internal controls, and compliance with both federal regs and your and the agency that is the oversight agency for the particular type of fund. So in our case, it's highway funding. So this helps us to build a complete picture how well your funds are being managed. Also in conjunction with some of those other things that we talked about, like site visits and other training and training through TTAP offices. So after the auditor IDs any issues or weaknesses, they are expected to provide a constructive narrative and give you recommendations so you can fix those findings. So auditors also communicate their findings concisely in this formal narrative. And in that narrative, they're also supposed to list outlining the steps for corrective actions. And so we'll be talking more about this later on in the presentation whenever we talk about how we would fix the findings with the corrective action process. So whenever we talk about auditees, your office is the auditee. So there are a number of things that your office should be doing, and this slide doesn't even cover them all, but one of the main things that you as an auditee, your offices should be doing is maintaining accurate records. So this includes documenting specifically for highway programs, transactions, receipts, and all the documents that back up all of the work that goes into your highway projects. So it's the auditee's responsibility to understand and comply with all the federal regs outlined in 2 CFR 200. Also, all of the guidelines that have to do with the project delivery guide that's out on the it's out publicly, but that is produced by the FHWA Office of Travel Transportation for program agreement tribes that do business with FHWA. So in preparation for the audit, you should be actively prepping for the audit by organizing all of your relevant documentation and make sure that your staff know where you're keeping all that documentation. So we're going to be digging a little bit further into the prep and some best practices that folks use whenever it comes to filing their documentation and knowing where everything is. So whenever your auditor comes in the door, When they ask you questions, when they're looking at transactions, you know where to go to find all the different documentations that'll back up what you're telling your auditor. So you're, as an auditee, another thing that you'll be doing is addressing the findings. So if there are issues or areas for improvement, it's the auditee's responsibility to develop a plan for addressing those findings. That could be corrective action plans, or it could just be following up with more documentation or things like that whenever there's questions with your audit. So something else as an auditee is you really want to build a really good working partnership with your auditors. So one of the ways that you can do that is maintaining open line of communication with them, and really help clarify the expectations of what they want to get out of the audit and what you need to get out of it. So that whole process and all the steps involved, it really goes a lot smoother whenever you have that nice open line of communication. And then lastly, think about the audit as continuously improving. And so looking beyond compliance, which granted is the most important thing, really, we want to take these audits and use them to ID areas that you can make better, fill in those gaps that the auditors help you find, and use it as a tool to make your programs better. Okay, so the next thing that we'll talk about, and we'll just touch on it quickly, but this comes straight from the reg. And so it's, what do the requirements look like? And so this list that you're looking at on the slide, these are the areas that auditors may be looking at during the single audit. Now, they may not touch on every single one in depth, but in theory, they may be looking at these throughout the audit. And so whenever there's a finding from the audit, those particular findings will be categorized in one of these line items. And in a second, we'll be talking about these areas and where they are the most challenges, and some of the strategies that some of our tribal partners have shared with us that they're using moving forward. So you'll find that some auditors are more comfortable in certain areas, and it makes sense that if they're more comfortable with the regulations when it comes to cash management or eligibility items when it comes to highway programs, that those may be, and this is in quotes, that's where they may spend more time looking into those specific areas that they're the most comfortable. So that just makes sense. And I'm just going to real quickly talk about the framework for internal controls. Whenever we talk about internal controls, these are built around the 5 core areas. And I'm not going to get too far into these at this point, but it does give you a picture of what those formal areas are that you might see on a auditor's narrative. So things like control environment, risk assessment, information and communication systems, which we will be talking more about that, control activities, and lastly, monitoring. So earlier, we mentioned just a little bit that the #1 finding for Alaska TTP programs right now is failure to report the single audit on time. So I think that this slide is important, but over the past few years and all the data that we've looked at and gone back and looked at all the findings, the lack of internal financial controls, lack of documentation, procurement and debarment, which we're going to have in focus slide where we'll talk a little bit more about that. Uh, uh, Charges that aren't eligible, and then lack of segregation of duties, which is a interesting thing whenever you're talking about some of our offices are really small offices with one or two people. So that can be a real challenge whenever it comes to splitting up duties. So some of the examples of really good internal controls that we've seen are listed right here. So let's focus a little bit on standard operating procedures for a second. Don't just stop at writing your SOPs, because, you know, we think about SOPs and keeping everything in order, but really not only that is, you know, we really want to try to target updates for about every 3 years. You know, whenever there's an auditor that goes in and looks at procedures and manuals that were written in 1985, you know, it raises a lot of red flags. You know, like, why is this thing so old? Granted, you've got processes that you say that you follow, but you can argue that, well, I follow this SOP to the T, but I'm pretty sure that those laws have changed in the past 25 years. And so it makes sense that every 3 years or so that you would want to look at some of those things. A really good strategy is to maybe even have people outside of your office, maybe in a partner office or a different office, kind of help you look at those SOPs, because as you all know, you know, you kind of get into the comfort zone thinking that everything's squared away, but having another set of eyes that's outside of your office look at those things for you is really, really helpful. And that's something that the FHWA Office of Tribal Transportation and even my office will be glad to help you with. If you need us to look at an SOP for you or give you advice about some of the things that we've seen that work and what may not work, we would be glad to help you with that. And later on, I'm going to share a link with you to a self-assessment, self-auditing template that a couple of years we built out. And we think that that might be helpful for you, just to help you prep for audit and just to help you give just to help you get an idea of maybe with some of these areas from 2 CFR 200 to make sure that your SOPs line up properly. And another one of these areas on this slide that I'm going to highlight is keeping all your documentation. Like, for real, keep everything you have and have someone that knows where to find it. We've been on audits where you could tell that they've kept everything since the start of time, but they couldn't find any of it whenever the auditor asked for it. And so whenever you can't find it, it makes it really hard to give your auditor a sense of confidence that you know what you're doing. Granted, you've got all of your documentation, but you can't find anything in order to prove your case. And in the next 3 slides, we'll cover some other best key practices that TTP partners use and that have worked really well whenever they went to prep for audits. So first thing to keep in mind is I tell people to start early. So start prepping well before the audit date. I know it's really easy. We've got a lot of things going on, especially seasonally, but whenever you know you have an audit coming up, make sure that you're prepping for it. So early planning helps to make sure that all your documents are in the right place and everybody knows where they are. Always continually think about maintaining your filing system. That means things like all of your records, your payrolls, your contracts, and any other supporting documentation that supports individual transactions and cost. So ensuring everything is easily accessible for your staff and for your audit really goes a long, long way. Like we had mentioned earlier, regularly look at your office's policies and procedures, ensure that they align with the federal regs. And if you're a program, if you're a program tribe with FHWA, that you're also looking at the guides that are provided by FHWA. If you've got a specific procedure that you aren't using it properly, that can easily turn into an audit finding. So if on the record that you're supposed to be doing A, B, C, D, but you aren't doing it A, B, C, D correctly, well, that could easily turn into a finding. So, and like I had mentioned earlier, really consider conducting internal pre-audits. You can perform those self audits either once a year or semi-annually, just every so often. It really helps you to pinpoint the possible issues early on, and that gives you time so you can fix them before the real audit. And it's really easy to get done, and I think it's one of the best ways to really get a nice clean audit. Really, if you only do one thing, if you only take away one thing from this training, is write this down: do an internal pre-audit before the actual audit. It's really helpful. Consider staff training. I know that there's a lot of you, and we hear it from our tribal partners every single week, that turnover on staff is really high. So they're getting a lot of changes in staff. So really educate your staff on the audit processes and what their roles are in it. Make sure that they understand what the expectations are, and that how they need to communicate with the auditors. So confidence goes a really long way when it comes to these audits. And so training your staff before it's time for the audit makes a lot of sense. And like I had mentioned earlier, setting up your lines of communication with your team members is really helpful. I would consider picking one primary point of contact that deals with the auditors to help streamline the whole process. And really only having one person to handle all the questions is really helpful, because I've seen audits where three people from the same office will give an auditor three different answers for the same question. And that kind of thing really hurts your case whenever the auditor is hearing three different stories from three different people within your office. So like I mentioned, I would recommend having one primary point of contact that's answering those questions, maybe consolidating all of the information that maybe some other staff members are helping them with, but then only having the one person one-on-one deal with your auditor. Like we had mentioned, document everything, keep detailed records on your financial transactions. And if you have a good financial system that is tied to images of invoices and load tickets and things like that, it really goes a long, long way. I always tell folks to stay calm and professional, because it's really easy to get flustered whenever you're asked a question and you don't know the answer to it. So stay calm and approach the process with a willingness to learn and make things better. So if, as you're going through the audit, there's something that you don't understand, it's really helpful to just take your time, do a little research, reach out to your partners, to FHWA even, and see if there's something that we can help you with. So butting heads and arguing with your auditors is really not a good way to get through an audit. I've seen that happen though. It's butting heads over details about documentation and why they're asking questions. And I would tell you to probably avoid those kind of things. And lastly, prepping for the audit doesn't have to be scary. It's having somebody come into your office and dig through your paperwork. I know can be hard and it can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. If you go through the prep and you follow some of these best practices, you'll be in the driver's seat to help steer the audit and make that process more smooth. So from day one, showing that your office is committed to transparency, you've got everything in order, and you've got a solid program management system. Oh, this is a interesting story, but I'll share this with you that we kind of ran into once with a partner during a audit. Is the office we were in kept their program office's checkbook on their desk out in the open on top of their inbox. So this person had to check the checkbook sitting out on top of their inbox. And, you know, like a typical office, there was a lot of traffic coming in and out of there. And so it really did create an issue where anyone could have picked up that checkbook, and that was noted as a finding. So, you know, it's little things like that. It's like common sense, but it's just something that they had always done. They said it was a small office and they'd keep the checkbook up there. There was only one person that should have been using it, but had they had that locked in a desk or even locked in a cabinet, it wouldn't have been a finding. So things like that that are common sense things really jump out to you. So take a look real quick at this slide, and we're going to highlight one of the comments on it, but it's segregation of duties. So the rule of thumb when it comes to segregation of duties is to have at least two different team members involved in transactions, especially when it comes to things like payments of any kind. You know, you never want to leave yourself exposed to being blamed for any funds missing or misuse of funds. So segregation of duties, having two people have to sign off on payments, things like that really protect you just as much as it helps protect the program. Another item that I'll highlight is inventories. This seems to also be a common finding. Is I tell folks to keep an inventory and do inventories. So every, you know, regularly, like semi-annual or annual, long story short is get them done, because it's really easy not to do them and then your records are way out of order. But if you keep this stuff on your calendar, that way you don't have to think about it. It just pops up on your calendar. It's time to do the inventory. You get everything done and everything is in order. It's a really easy way to keep from getting findings by just using your calendar with these inventories. And the final two areas to kind of think about, we had mentioned this just a little bit earlier, but training your staff is a really great way to keep everyone on the same sheet, especially when it comes to processes. So talk about who does what and who signs what and where to file it. So even if you've only got 2 or 3 folks in your office still do the training, sometimes offices will tell me, listen, Doug, I've only got 3 people in this office, so we really don't do formal training, quote, formal. And so what I say is at least have one-on-ones, you know, call it training, but it's a one-on-one talk to where each of you understand exactly who's supposed to do what, and then don't and also keep in mind that once you have that training, make sure that you capture it on paper and then file it somewhere. So whenever you do go through an audit, you can produce some sort of documentation that shows, hey, on this date, we had this training, XYZ. And so in just a minute, we'll get a little bit more focused into vendor evaluation and why that matters. But right now, start thinking about always checking sam.gov whenever you set up a new vendor. So this is a really common finding. You know, you've been doing business with a vendor for years, let's say, and you didn't know that vendor has a debarment issue where they're on sam.gov, barred from doing business on any projects that have to do with federal funds. And then you find yourself doing business with them, not knowing that, and then there's an issue. So you always want to make sure that they have no legal issues or other flags that might make them barred from doing business. So believe it or not, there's a lot of vendors out there that are barred for different reasons. And the last thing you want to do is be doing business with one of those vendors and then an audit come along and then there's a finding because, oops, I didn't check sam.gov, which literally takes about 2 minutes to pop in the system, punch in the vendor info, and see if they're barred or not. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about your auditor. So what's the key to getting a great auditor? So I would tell you to think about these factors. Define your needs. You know, clearly outline your specific services and the needs that you have for the auditor. Obviously, think about the scope of your audit, the way your program works, the size of your program, the areas of expertise within your program. And whenever you're looking at the auditors, whenever you go to hire one, consider that they have the right qualifications. Obviously, they want to be a CPA, you know, all the obvious things, but I would tell you experience in auditing tribal governments would make a lot of sense. And experience working with tribal governments and tribal transportation highway programs would make a lot of sense. And obviously someone that knows a lot about 2 CFR 200 is a huge must. So if I were you, I would consider in your proposal is seeking proposals for multiple different auditing firms. It's really easy to get comfortable and only seek proposals for maybe one firm, but I would reach out and talk to multiple different firms, evaluate their methodologies and their fees, and find the best fit for you and your needs. So don't make it all about cost. I mean, cost is a factor, but don't make it all about who's the least cost. You know, as they say, sometimes you kind of get what you pay for. Not always, but sometimes. Interviews, I would consider interviewing your potential auditors to gauge their understanding of your program. You know, how much do they know about your program? And also in that interview, you can tell a lot about their style and the way that they communicate and their willingness to collaborate and be flexible. And obviously, just like anything else, you would want to check references. I would ask for a list of more than one, and I would take a little bit of time and actually check them. I would get with the other clients that they've given you, particularly those clients that might be similar to your programs, and ask about how things went and how was the quality of the work that they did. And I think that that'll really open your eyes to, wow, there you will hear more comments about how it could have been better. And so I think that there's a lot of value that if you'll take a little time on the front end and check those references, it'll go a long, long way. I would also consider, whenever you're looking at hiring your auditor, consider their understanding of tribal culture. A really good fit culturally can make the process go a lot smoother, especially if they understand highway programs and what's important to a highway program, and the TTP program could really make things go a lot smoother. So, you know, and to wrap up this slide, I would think about some of these things when you're picking your auditor, because it not only meets your technical needs, but it also might help you line up with your values and goals. So after you've gone through the audit process, you've done all the work, at the completion of the auditee must prepare a corrective action plan to address each audit finding included in the current year's auditor's narrative. So everybody's heard about corrective action plans, and you may have even done some in past audits, but the corrective action plan is a structured approach that outlines how you're going to address the findings or deficiencies found in the audit. And keep in mind, like I had mentioned earlier, if you'll treat it as less of a punitive process and more of a roadmap to make your program better, it's a really much easier process. If you just think of, okay, this corrective action plan that we work on is going to make our program better year after year after year. So there are a handful of key components whenever it comes to your corrective action program, is that you clearly understand the problem and the deficiency noted in the audit report. So sometimes whenever you read these narratives that your auditor writes up, sometimes you have to ask questions so you understand what the root cause of this problem is. You know what I mean? Say it's whatever that finding is, you really need to understand it before you can get into your corrective action. You know, you don't want to go down the wrong road, doing things that you don't need to be doing, wasting times because you don't fully understand what the problem was. And so outlining each of those actions that you're going to be taking to address the issue also helps. And I would think about considering timelines whenever you work on your corrective actions, is to say, here's the action that we're going to take, who's going to be doing it, and here's the timeline when that's going to be completed. So if you assign who's going to do it, assign the timelines and who's going to do what, and then follow it and track it over time, you're going to find that you're going to get these corrective actions plans done quicker, and the quality of the corrective action will be much, much better. So I've seen corrective action plans take years because the offices didn't make them priority. You know, you kind of lose track of these things. You know, the audit happens, the report's published, but the corrective actions don't get finished timely. So what happens for findings that are federal highway funding findings, eventually, for those that don't get corrected, all those findings go to US DOT headquarter audits office, and then they call my office, and then we call you. So it's like this stuff flows downhill. So I mean, you really don't want to get US DOT headquarters involved in this stuff. If we can just get it all done early on, everything's smooth and everything gets closed out. So documentation, just like everything else, keep your documentation of your CAP process, the decisions that were made, the actions that were taken, things like SOPs were updated, and then the outcomes of what you did. So this is really crucial for your future audits. Because your auditor is going to ask about your previous year's findings, and for you to have those corrective action plans in place. And if that meant that you had to do training for your staff, or you had to do inventories, whatever it is that you were supposed to have done, having documentation to prove that you had done those is really, really helpful. And lastly, a really good way to look at corrective action plans, like I had mentioned, is it really gives you a chance to turn findings into opportunities for growth. And so year over year, if you have findings or deficiencies and you correct those things, in theory, your program should just get stronger and stronger and stronger. Okay. And like we had mentioned earlier, we're going to focus in on one of the pillars of your internal control framework that's really critical to your process as a whole, and it's financial systems. So whenever I talk about financial systems, we're talking about the software, the program that you use to track, manage, report your federal funds that's coming into your program. And really that's a key. This is really one of the main keys to keeping everything in order, especially when it comes to transaction testing and documentation that backs up all of those individual transactions. And if you've got a good financial system, and we're going to talk about some of these tips that can really help you make your system better. So there are tons of financial systems that are out there. Everything from really basic off-the-shelf software to multi-million-dollar financial suites made by Oracle and these companies that are millions and millions of dollars that are complex. So the interesting thing is that the law doesn't dictate that you spend crazy money to have the top of the line software package for your system. It just says that your system must track unit cost, track accurate, current, complete financial data, provide source and application of federal funds. And then there's a few other things that are minor to these three main things that your system must have. But I've seen people have a whole series of Excel spreadsheets that they use as their financial system. That, granted, it can be a little clumsy, but they were able to answer the basic questions of, can you track unit cost? Is it accurate? Financial data is provided, and the source documentation, the backup, they have it filed in such a way that for each transaction, they could show documentation that backs up each of those federal costs. And here's a few more things that, whenever it comes to financial systems, is effective control, ability to budget. So, and the thing about budget too that's really helpful is having a system that helps you budget your budget versus your actuals, that you can show to your leadership, show to your chairman, show to your board that you have a really good handle on things, and it's up to date. All of your data is up to date, real-time budget data and actual data. Your ability to track records, also, again, with your source documentation for all the backup, really makes a difference. And so now that we've kind of talked about the guidelines that the law dictates for your financial system, let's talk about why they're important and how well-developed systems are really critical to your program. So having a really thorough financial system helps you cut down on errors, obviously, and financial data that's accurate. Whenever the auditor gets to looking at financial statements, comparing it to your financial system as far as your payables or whatever else that they're looking at, obviously, you want that stuff to be accurate. And it having a good financial system also streamlines your processes. Things like your budgeting talks to your payroll, that talks to your reporting and dashboards. So it can save you time. It can save you a lot of money. It can save your and it can let your staff focus more on the higher priority work and less on nitpicky data. So improved compliance, obviously having a really good system helps you meet all the guidelines that's contained within 2 CFR 200 and helps you manage that risk of not being compliant. It really comes down to investing a little bit on the front end. Granted, it might cost a little bit more than some other systems, but putting a little bit of resources and training in a strong financial system is something that's really going to pay off in the long run and really going to help you enhance your day-to-day ops, but also support your long-term goals. An interesting finding that we've seen is that, if I haven't said it in one of these previous slides, is user IDs and passwords for your financial systems are critical for keeping your data safe. So, all the things that we've seen on the news when it comes to data hacking and different things like that, you like really want to limit your access whenever it comes to your financial systems, because thinking about it, there are certain things that your financial systems can do that you don't want just everybody in your office to be able to do. Not everybody should be able to make journal entries or process payments from your system, because obviously you just open yourself up to the possibility of fraud and issues whenever you have too many hands in the system pie. So, like I had mentioned, is the bottom line is these systems can cost a lot of money. And so when you're trying to figure out what would be feasible for your system and either developing or upgrading your system, it's the cost benefits probably going to be at the top of your list. So like I had mentioned, the federal regulations do not dictate that your system costs several $1,000,000. And like I had mentioned, in theory, your system can be completely manual and still be compliant. The amount that you spend on your system does not always equate to compliance. We've seen tribal partners that have really nice high dollar financial systems, but yet they're not managed properly. And then they have a lot of findings. So that's why the self-assessment that we talked about is so critical. So whether or not you got a really great financial system or a less fancy one, the trick is to assess it regularly, annually, semi-annually, whatever that looks like, where you're looking at it and you're checking it and you're going down the checklist of things that it's supposed to be doing for you. Make sure that it's doing all those different things for you. So some of the best systems allow for the different modules to share data. Things like receivables are sharing data with the payables. Your payroll is rolling up into leadership dashboards. And so I'll kind of go back to the whole gist of it, is that these strong systems help bring down the risk and help you to mitigate the risk of fraud. And that's really one of the main things that you want to have in place is mitigate even the possibility that there could be abuse, fraud, or even errors in your data. So I had mentioned earlier is that we have developed a self-assessment tool. A couple of years ago, we were working with one of our tribal partners who started asking me these questions, and so working with them, we developed this tool that it'll help them evaluate their system whenever it comes to all of the elements of 2 CFR 200. And so some of those areas that we would sample are how well your system tracks revenue and expenditures, the source of funds, comparison of outlays to the budgeted amounts, maintain source documents, which I had mentioned is that some financial systems allow you to scan in all of your images, all images of invoices and load tickets and all different payrolls and different things like that. So you can scan them into the system. And then whenever you click on that specific transaction, it will tie it to that image. And those things are awesome, especially whenever you're going through an audit. And then reporting. And so that's something that you're seeing a lot more of nowadays is financial systems that can roll up and produce dashboards and different things for leadership. And so that's a really great tool to have in place if you need to take to your chairman, or you need to take to a board, or you need to take to one of the stakeholders that is not really involved in the day-to-day operation of your office, but yet you would really like to be able to show them how well that you're managing your system, especially when it comes to your data. So security, we mentioned a little bit about with the passwords, with the IDs. But as with everything else, we recommend having a detailed SOP, a procedure in place that's up to date, that talks about all the possible threats and how you're going to mitigate any of the risk involved with things like IDs and passwords, keeping your computer system safe, to theft. What happens if there's a fire or something, and were there backups to your data, things like that. So contained within your SOP, I would consider all those different things, and really just helps you to continue your operations in the event that something bad happens. And I hope that makes sense. And here's a few more best practices that we've seen when it comes to financial systems. And we'll just kind of go through these real quick because our time's getting short. But SOPs, training your staff. Obviously, we had mentioned, just like with the rest of all of your areas, make sure that your staff that deals with your financial system is well trained. And after you do that training, make sure that you document it and file it in a place where you can find that. Develop self-assessment, which we had mentioned earlier too. I would also consider something called a super user. Not only just training your staff on how to use their system, but maybe even develop a couple of super users that really know the system inside and out, so they can answer those detailed questions, especially whenever there's an issue. And the other area to get it in focus on that we had mentioned earlier, because it's such a common finding now, is vendor evaluation and the importance of checking your vendors before you do business with them, and maybe even every so often going back through your vendors that you're currently doing business with to ensure that they're not debarred from doing business with the federal government. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but obviously companies can be debarred for things like fraud, mismanagement, and multiple other legal reasons that they've gone through a process. The federal government has come to the conclusion that they should be barred, and so their information gets entered into SAMS.gov and they're barred from doing business. And the FHWA guidelines, and also in 2 CFR 180, you will see that FHWA programs are supposed to certify, and certifying that the participants or vendors that you're doing business with, you can do that certification by checking in SAMS.gov. The causes for debarment, things like fraud, criminal offenses, violation of antitrust, embezzlement, theft, forgery, so and so. You know, it's not that hard to just take a little bit of time and check it in SAMS.gov. And there's a few more causes that I won't read through to you, but if you have any questions about that, it is in 2 CFR 180 if you wanted to dig even further. And like I had mentioned, the excluded parties list is maintained by the GSA, and it's out there at SAM.gov. And this is something that comes up a lot with findings. So, you know, taking 15 minutes, and it's not rocket science. You know, you set up a process. Whenever you say, you know, whenever we set up a new vendor, our process step one is to log into SAMS.gov, make sure that they're not listed there as being barred, and then also think about setting up a process in your SOPs where you're monitoring the vendors that you currently do business with. And just a little bit of effort there will go a long way. So okay. So we don't have all the answers, but we'll do our best to try to track down all the answers to the questions that you might have. So this might be the best time, Vicky, for us to see if there's any questions that we can try to answer when it comes to the audit process.
Okay. People are welcome to raise their hand or post a question in either in the Q&A or the chat if you have anything that you want to ask.
And I would love to have any comments from anybody that may have been through an audit where, you know, where there was something that worked out really well, or there was something that worked out less well. I would be interested in adding that stuff to my list. So, or if you've got an audit that's maybe coming up and you've got some challenges or issues that you're kind of working through, I'd be interested to hear that stuff.
Nobody has raised their hand, and well, see if anybody's writing anything into the Q&A. So do you have, oh, there we go. Tanya Horn's writing, she's done many audits and think the presentation was incredibly thorough and well put together. The presentation is empowering to those who haven't gone through an audit. Thank you, Tanaya.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can. I've got a link to that assessment tool. I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to get it into the chat pod. I'm gonna do that.
You
Just
should be
bear
able to just copy and paste. Now, does
and
anyone else have any questions? Raise
give
your
me.
hand.
I'm
Okay.
gonna, I'm gonna
Doug, I
get
think
the.
you've done such a good job of explaining that everybody's fine right now. Do you
Yeah,
have
I'm
your
gonna.
contact
I'm.
information?
Yeah, I'm gonna. First, I'm gonna put this into the chat pod, and if you go to this page, this is our FHWA Office of Tribal Transportation web page. But this is an extra page that we've got in there that's got a couple of tools. One of those is the assessment tool. And then bear with me here. I'm trying to get back to the presentation.
Okay, your presentation stayed up, Doug.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah, did not see you go to the FHWA webpage.
So my presentation is still up. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm just trying to find it.
All right, you got another thank you coming from another one of our watchers. Great information about your presentation from in the
Well, thank
Q&A.
you. I can't get back to my presentation, but I am going to go back into the chat if I can get in there, and I'm going to put my contact information.
All right, well, let's see. Let me see if I'm going to stop your screen sharing then if you're caught. And I will share my screen that has the web page on it.
There you go.
Okay, so everybody should see that particular web page. And then I will also, let's see, if you go down to contact information, this is the general, and this is Doug's contact information is also available on this FHWA website, which is the Office of Tribal Transportation contact info page. You can find multiple people's contacts, including Matt Bird, who was our presenter last time, Doug, who presented today, and other useful people to get in touch with questions if you have questions regarding FHWA's stuff.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect, Vicky. Yeah, and Matt's great. He's the primary point of contact for your FHWA payments and just really great. So really good guy.
All right.
But if there's something that we can help you with in the future when it comes to single audits or financial technical assistance, please feel free to give me a call, and I'm always glad to help out.
All
Thank
right.
you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Doug. Thank everybody for attending. And at this point, I will stop sharing. There we go. Now I will stop recording